Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, show number 91 for the 16th of July 2010. A very jet-lagged Richard Saunders here with you once again from Sydney, Australia. What a wonderful time we had, Joe Benhamu, Rachael Dunlop, Ran Segev and myself at the amazing meeting in Las Vegas. And I'm pleased to say that we have a swag full of great interviews for you over the next couple of months. Today's interview, kicking off, is none other than Ben Radford, the mystery investigator, the psychic investigator, the cryptozoology, let me get that right, the cryptozoology investigator. And conducting this interview today is Dr. Rachael Dunlop. That's followed by Dr. Rachie Reports. Sit down, hang on to your teeth, have a stiff drink. You won't believe this, Dr. Rachie Reports. Meryl Dorey and the Australian Vaccination Network, as Rachie says, their house of cards is collapsing around them. Really good report, a really good update on the status with the Australian Vaccination Network. Phew, I think I need another cup of coffee to power on at the moment, so I'll run away and do that, and you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
I'm Dr. Rachie, and this week I present our very first interview from TAM8 in Las Vegas, and it's Talking Monsters and Cryptozoology with Ben Radford. Ben has a background in psychology and now spends his time travelling the world investigating ghosts, monsters, and other strange creatures. In this interview, Ben tells us about his investigations into two vampires, the goat-sucking chupacabra and the leaky cheery. And he also talks about his investigations into the donut-eating ghost of the chemo theatre. Here's Ben Radford talking to us from the green room at TAM8 Las Vegas.
Dr. Rachie, hi!
Hi, Ben Radford. Welcome to the Skeptic Zone. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Now, I know you because you are well known for your work in investigating the paranormal, in particular, ghosties and haunted houses and stuff like that. Tell us, for our listeners who don't know about your background, can you give us a little bit of a history of what you do?
Sure. My educational background is in psychology, and that really helps to inform me when I'm doing investigations into basically all manner of the paranormal, because oftentimes, the evidence that's being put forth for these things comes down to eyewitnesses. It comes down to anecdotes. It's a person says, I saw something, or I experienced something, or I don't know what this is. Sometimes of course you'll have photographs or EVPs or things like that, but for the most part, the bulk of it, the evidence for these things is personal experience, and so that's sort of the approach that I take, is the more sort of psychological angle, trying to understand, well, what are people seeing, what are they experiencing, and so I've done a wide variety of investigations over the last 10, 12 years. My new book, Scientific Paranormal Investigation, is recently out. Everything from lake monsters to Bigfoot to psychics, remote viewers, miracles, Bigfoot, chupacabra. I've recently finished a big book on the Hispanic vampire goat sucker thingy that's supposedly out there. So that should be coming out in March. So.
Can you tell us a bit more? What is it? Chupacabra. So early in the morning. Chupacabra.
Chikiwatsi. The chupacabra is probably the world's third best known monster after Bigfoot and Nessie. But curiously enough, it's only been around for about 15 years. It basically appeared in Puerto Rico in 1995. There's actually a couple different descriptions, and they're remarkably different, which to me suggests that people are seeing different things, not one thing that has a wide variety of descriptions on it. But typically, the main description is a creature that stands about 4 to 5 feet tall, has long spikes down the back, has sort of alien-esque eyes, sort of wraparound eyes, either red or black or dark gray eyes. And its main characteristic is that it sucks goats.
Oh, right.
Yes, goat sucking. This is not a sexual thing. This is blood sucking. So let's be very clear about that.
Because we were all thinking that straight away.
Well, some people would go there, but yes.
This is audio, so now everyone has that image in their head. Right?
I'm just throwing it. So you can edit this however you want, but
this is not going out.
Basically, the word chupacabra in Spanish means goat sucker.
Okay.
And goat sucker is referring to blood. As you might imagine. So the chupacabra is basically a vampire. It's an updated version of the European vampire. And in my book, I sort of trace the folklore and the etymology of vampires from, say, the 1800s. And then I look, for example, at Latin American vampires and stories of vampires and also in East Africa. There's actually a vampire that I investigated in La Paz, Bolivia. And it's called the liquichiri, and it's an Aymara word. And the liquichiri means fat stealer. And there's actually an entity that many people in the Andes believe stalks the highlands in the Andes in Latin America that will steal your fat. It has like a mesmerizing ability to like freeze you or paralyze you, or basically hypnotize you. And you will wake up and you will have slits down your side, and it will actually extract your fat. And the story goes that with the fat, it actually sells it to American companies, specifically American companies, also Western European, but mostly American companies, for use in cosmetics, machinery, things like that.
Wow.
Yes, it's a fat stealer. So that's one. And of course, in the Andes, you have to understand that it sounds silly to some people, like, well, stealing fat, like, hey, I got some extra, no problem,
But they need it there because it's freezing.
Exactly. Yeah. That's something that a lot of people miss, is that, up in the highlands of the Andes, I mean, it's damn cold, and fat, helps you survive. And so in some ways, you have to look at this as a metaphorical thing, and it's extracting something that the natives need to survive. And you can go into the sort of folklore of the ways in which Latin Americans specifically have had the resources extracted from them. You look at the conquistadors.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so this is sort of an extended metaphor of that. And so people, particularly in Puerto Rico, there's a strong anti-U.S. government sentiment because they don't have statehood. They're a possession of the U.S., but they're not an actual state. And so among many Puerto Ricans, they feel that the U.S. sort of takes what they want and leaves the rest, and there's a lot more to it. But basically, there's a pre-existing notion of a vampiric entity in Puerto Rican culture and folklore, and in the Caribbean in general.
But have people actually seen this entity that you describe? Or, it's not completely metaphorical.
Chupacabra?
Right? No, the one you're talking about, the fat stealer, yeah.
No, there is. If you look at the folklore behind it, typically it's considered to be it's either a local or it's a person, or it's either local or a local working for an American. Basically, sort of, there's always a connection.
There's an American connection there.
Yeah,
right.
there's a lot of xenophobia connected to it. Fear of like, oh my God, what are they doing to us? In some cases, they're said to be tall white figures, sort of almost ghostly, long fingers. They may have long knives that they will pull out. Sometimes they're said to drive around in vans, and they will. And there's actually another variation called sacaojos, which means eye stealers, in Peru. And there's people that believe that these liquichiris or sacaojos will kidnap young children and snatch out their eyes, and they'll surgically remove their eyes. Again, where do they go? They go to Americans. They go to Europeans. And this actually ties into the urban legend of the organ snatching. Kidney theft.
You wake up in a bath of ice with your kidneys gone, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Right. And so it's actually interesting how these things tie together. You have the folklore, you have the ethnography, and the sort of the cultural stuff. So,
but I'm interested in. Have people seen this? Like, you described what they look like a white figure, and so is that from hallucinations, or is that just from stories?
Well, you have to understand that again, because liquichiri, it's really considered a profession. That it's not a separate. It's not like a demon. It's not a ghost. it is a person. The leaky chittery could be you, me, or any of us here.
Right.
So it's an occupation. It's not a type of entity.
It's not a paranormal kind of.
Not among these people, because they believe this exists. In fact, there have been cases. I was actually, for researching my book earlier this year, I was reading up on cases where locals have been attacked, have been accused of being leaky chittery and killed. I mean,
really?
People have been lynched in the Andes, and I think mostly in Bolivia, where just some. And again, this goes back directly to like the witch trials, where if something bad happens, there's farmers, calves are stillborn, crops are else. Who did it? It's that crazy lady down the road.
Yeah.
And you had the scapegoating witchcraft thing, and the exact same thing happens in a different context with the leaky chittery.
Yeah.
And other vampires in Latin America.
So the other vampire you were talking about, the first one, what was that?
The chupacabra.
Yeah. Can we go back to the chupacabra? Yeah. So tell me a bit more about that. So that's Puerto Rican, did you say?
Yes, it emerged in 1995, Puerto Rico. There was something weird that was attacking animals, goats, chickens, cattle, what have you. But nobody had seen it. Every now and then animals would appear that were apparently mutilated or had blood drained from them, but nobody had ever seen what had caused it. Until the second week of August in 95, when a woman named Madeline Tolentino said that she saw what later became known as the chupacabra. And I went to Puerto Rico about a month ago, and I tracked her down and interviewed her for the first time since 95. Mm-hmm. And she says that she saw a creature that was about 3-4 feet tall. It had spikes down the back, had sort of wraparound eyes, a very alien-esque. Some depictions show like long, sharp claws, but she actually told me that's wrong. But it had 5 fingers, and it sort of leapt up from where it was. She saw it just outside the window, outside of her mother's house.
Is it a big, tall thing?
No. It was a really short thing.
All right.
And then it sort of jumped off into this sort of superhumanly jumped off into the woods nearby. And her description became basically the world's best known depiction of the chupacabra, because she consulted with a UFO researcher by the name of Jorge Martin in Latin America, in Puerto Rico. And he drew for her based upon her description, and then sent it out on the internet. And so, if you do a Google image search for chupacabra, most of them you'll return this sort of creature, with the long fingers and the claws and the spikes on the back, which is based on her description. So that's that's one version of the chupacabra. But interestingly enough, if you look at where people actually started claiming to find chupacabra bodies, I mean, there are people. I met a woman in Cuero, Texas, outside of San Antonio. She's got the severed head of what she thinks is a chupacabra in her freezer. I think it's probably a coyote. The DNA tests suggest it's a coyote, but she's convinced it's a chupacabra. So but the problem is that it's there's the difference between night and day between the thing that Madeline Tolentino eyewitnessed in Canóvanas, Puerto Rico in 95, and this dead, mangy chupacabra. I mean, they're not the same thing at all. But what you find is that with the chupacabra specifically, is that they'll label anything weird chupacabra. There's a dead raccoon, that's a chupacabra. There's a mangy coyote, must be a chupacabra. So anyway, that was like about a 5-year investigation, and I did a bunch of stuff on that. So
tell us about the investigation. I mean, what did you find? Did she actually see it attack animals, or she just saw this strange creature?
No. That's what's interesting is that the eyewitnesses, everyone sort of brings a different piece of the pie to it. So, for example, she saw this weird, almost alien-esque creature outside her window. She never said it was a chupacabra. I mean, she never said, that is a chupacabra. And she's like, wow, I saw something weird. But what happened was that the story got out, and again, it got out within the context of a UFO researcher. I mean, one of the main people that are promoting the whole idea of a chupacabra in Puerto Rico were UFO people who, with all due respect, are not known for their scholarship and researching abilities.
Right.
And so the image that emerged of the chupacabra was tinged with conspiracy theories. It was tinged with just bad research, this, that, and the other. So it was really other people that said, "Oh, well, she must have seen the chupacabra," and she's like, "Okay, I mean, if you want to,
that's what you
if you want to call it." So it's this really interesting folkloric amalgamation of one person's sighting, another person's assumption, another person. One person finds, a dog that they think for whatever reason is drained of blood. 2 weeks later, someone sees something weird. Halfway across the island, and then someone else sees something, and everyone's just like, oh well, it all must be one big thing. No, it's not necessarily all one thing. You have to look at each individual case, not just sort of lump them together into this chupacabra.
So how do you go about investigating something like that, Ben? Because you don't have access to the dead animals.
On occasion, you do.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, in the case of again, it depends on which chupacabra you're talking about. If you're talking about the one in Puerto Rico, no one's ever found them. I mean, there's been eyewitness sightings, especially Mrs. Tolentino's, but no one's found a dead body. The only place they've found dead bodies are in places, mostly in Texas. There's been a handful of chupacabras there. But when you find the dead bodies, when you actually have a specimen to examine, and you do DNA testing on them, the results are invariably, it's a canid. It's either a dog, a coyote. That's what those are. I mean, this is not rocket science. This is genetic science, and this is what they are.
Yeah.
So in the case of Madeline Tolentino's sighting, my main contribution to it was I was actually able to identify where the chupacabra came from. Because this is one of the main mysteries of the chupacabra, because you look, for example, at the Loch Ness Monster. People have been claiming to see the thing since the 30s, basically. In the case of Bigfoot, the Bigfoot believers like to sort of say, oh, well, the natives knew about this thing, 200 years ago, whatever else. In the case of chupacabra, pretty much everybody admits that it appeared out of nowhere in 95. Now, as you know, animals don't appear out of nowhere. I mean, you just don't, oh, there's this new kangaroo. Yeah. No, that just doesn't happen.
There's this thing called evolution, yeah?
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical, but so my real contribution was trying. So my challenge to sort of really bring the pieces of the mystery together was to figure out where did the chupacabra come from? Because again, it came from somewhere, and at a very specific time. And so what I was able to do was I was able to actually find where Madeline Tolentino got this image of the chupacabra that we find, and what I found was that she had seen a science fiction film.
Oh, this gets interesting. Okay, yeah.
She had seen a movie called Species.
Oh.
That came out in 1995.
Right.
It came out in Puerto Rico a month before her sighting.
Right.
And in my new book, this is actually the last chapter in the book, chapter 13. I show depictions of her version of chupacabra and a still from the film, and they're virtually identical. Piece by piece by piece by piece, they're on a dozen or so different criterion. The spikes down the back, the eyes, the shape, I mean, it's right there.
Yeah. And
in fact, she admitted that she saw the movie. So this is a fascinating case in which you have an eyewitness who put forth the best known image of the chupacabra in history. And where did she get it? She saw
Species.
She saw a movie called Species, and she brought and it gets even more interesting because if you look at the origin stories, there's two main theories about where the chupacabra came from. Some people believe that it's an extraterrestrial, it's an alien that came down wherever else, and then other people believe that it's the results of a top secret U.S. government experiments, genetic experiments. Of course, conspiracy stuff, exactly. Now, in the case of Species, in the film, because I rewatched it a couple times after discovering this, the alien in the film is both an extraterrestrial alien and the result of a top secret U.S. government genetic experiment. I mean, it's right. The parallels could not be clearer. And I was like, oh my God, it's a perfect match.
Yeah.
And so what's fascinating to me is that, again, you have this animal, this again, the world's third best known monster that came from a Hollywood film.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not to say, I mean, that doesn't answer the entire mystery of the chupacabra, but her original sighting in 95 is undeniably the most significant event in the whole hit, and that's what launched it. That's where the people got, and of course after her image got out, other people, I might have seen something like that, yeah, maybe it was, so you had this sort of contagion effect.
Because that's interesting, because the whole sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole kind of depiction of the aliens too, like the greys, the tall, skinny aliens with the black eyes. didn't that start appearing around the time that alien movies started happening in Hollywood as well?
Yeah,
we're talking the 50s or something.
Yeah, there's an interesting correlation. In fact, it was interesting when I re-interviewed her, Miss Tolentino, last month. She actually said, well, it actually looked more like a different alien. She said it looked like E.T. So her references keep going back to Hollywood films
movies.
about aliens, which is just fascinating to me. But so there's definitely correlation. In fact, I found a couple other cases in which, in the case of the Loch Ness Monster, and also Daniel Loxton did some good research in Skeptic magazine on the Thetis Lake Monster, and it's kind of a long story, but basically, people in both cases and in others, eyewitnesses were reporting things as in real life actual experiences. I saw this that they had seen in movies. I mean, there's no question. I mean, it's a proven fact that that's where they got the image.
Yeah.
And so, my suggestion that Tolentino, could have and probably did, almost certainly did, translate something they saw in the movie into real life. This is not wild speculation. This has happened before.
Yeah, it's happened a lot.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And it's not that they're lying. I mean, again, I go back to...
This is the psychology side of what you do, right?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to my background in psychology, and my assumption is not that they're lying or they're crazy. I mean, I spent 4 hours with her, and she's a very nice woman. She's very presentable. I don't have no reason to doubt her credibility. My assumption is that she just did something that we all do, which is she misunderstood or she misperceived or she saw something she didn't remember. Maybe the movie that she'd seen a day or two a week earlier helped fill in. I don't know what happened, but you got to go back to Occam's razor. What's more likely? Is it more likely that she just happened to see a monster that looked almost exactly like a monster that was in a hit film at the time, or that a complete coincidence? Well,
it's obvious, Ben. There's a parallel universe filled with alien creatures from Hollywood that we only sometimes we're able to see.
That would be my assumption, yes.
Yeah.
I like your skeptical mind. That's good. It's one of those where there was so much, when I was doing the research on it, there was so much misinformation, myths, and bullshit. It was remarkable trying to plow through it because, in most investigations, you have at least somebody who's done some half-assed research in there. In the case of the Chupacabra, oddly enough, and I don't say this out of pride, but I was the first skeptical investigator to really look at this. I find it kind of annoying, frankly.
What, that people?
That it falls to me to do this stuff. I mean, I don't mind doing it, and I'm good at it, but oftentimes I'm like, really? Did nobody else? Because her interview, for example, where she mentioned that she'd seen the movie Species, that was published in '96. I mean, this is
the interview where she said she'd seen the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I dug it up and I put the pieces together, but it was all there. Yeah. But it's just that as is often the case, and you know this as well, is that it's not so much that these are great unsolved mysteries. It's just that no one had bothered to do more than a half-assed, cut and paste job, and nobody had done any real investigation. And so that's what I bring to it. I mean, I don't claim to bring any particular level of genius or brilliance to it, but I'm willing to look at it open-minded and put in the time and the effort. And unfortunately, most people aren't.
So how do you go about putting together an investigation? For example, can we talk about it in the context of the haunted cinema that you spoke about at DragonCon last year?
With the Chemo Theater?
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting case. That was basically a forensic historical research case. Yeah, in a nutshell, I mean, that was the Chemo Theater ghost investigation, and that's been since published in 14 Times and also in Skeptical Inquirer magazine. And in that case, there was supposedly a young boy whose ghost liked donuts, and if you didn't leave donuts for the ghost, he would ruin plays and performances. And the theater is called the Chemo Theater. It's in downtown Albuquerque, where I live in New Mexico. And I'd heard something about it when I was growing up. I mean, not when I was a real child, but as growing up a little later. And again, the idea was that they actually have a shrine there, so that before performances, cast and crew members will string up donuts and leave donuts out for this ghost. Presumably, they're not eaten. I don't know. The idea is if you don't do that, if you don't appease the ghost, bad things happen.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the story, and the main one is that during a performance of Christmas Carol, one time the director, this allegedly happened in the 70s, according to one story, and the cast and crew put up donuts, and the director's like, "What are these donuts doing here? I'm putting on a performance here. Get these donuts out of here." He's like, "Don't take down the donuts." And he's like, "No, this is all bullshit. Take it out of there." So they did that, and sure enough, the performance of A Christmas Carol was ruined. Lights exploded. Actors tripped over themselves. Objects on stage mysteriously flew across the stage. Everything that could go wrong. Props didn't work. This and that. Actors forgot their lines. It was a ruined performance, basically. And of course, afterwards, the director was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." So he went and supposedly bought 400 donuts and laid them all over the theater. Wish I had a photo of that. But that was the story. And as I researched it, I found that there was, in fact, a young boy who had been killed in theater. So that much, that part of the story was certainly true, because the story went that there was during a performance of an Abbott and Costello film, I think in 1951 or 1952, there was an explosion in the boiler room, basically in the lobby, and it was, blood and shards and concrete everywhere. And unfortunately, the only person that was killed was a 6-year-old boy named Bobby Darnall, and he was in fact killed. I did archive research, and I tracked down the newspaper report that showed that, and so I ascertained that much of the story was certainly true. But then the question was, is the ghost actually doing this? And at that point, I needed to track down an eyewitness. And if it was the 1970s, then presumably someone was there, might have seen it. And as it turned out, there was a technical director who worked there at the time, and he's still there to this day. And I tracked him down.
He still works there? He's
still there. He's been there for 30-some years.
Okay.
And because my assumption, quite honestly, going into it, when I first heard the stories, it was made up. It was just a friend of a friend, urban legend, whatever else. I assumed that as I researched it more and more, it'd be like, yeah, no one knows anything about that. But I talked to the technical director. He's like, yeah, I was there that night.
He was there.
He was there that night.
Wow.
He saw the ghost. He saw the
stuff move around and. Right.
He described all the things that happened. The lights and the explosions and this and that. He's like, yeah. I mean, I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
It was an interesting turn on the case, because I went from assuming, I didn't assume, but it was sort of leading me to think that this is all going to be sort of another story that had nothing to a first person eyewitness account of that. So I talked to him, and I interviewed him, and he actually gave me a very similar story to the original story. I mean, there were a couple important details that had been changed, but the first part of it was trying to figure out when it was. When was this performance? Now, the original story was that it happened in, I think, 74, 75. And I proved that couldn't be the case, because in doing some archive research, I found out that the Chemo Theater in 1974 was actually a porno theater.
Really?
Yeah, they were showing sex films. There was a film called Teenage Fantasies.
Yeah.
Which, as you can imagine, is somewhat different than A Christmas Carol.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah, and so this is apparently not well known around Albuquerque, that there was this sort of era in which it was some little blue lights going on there. So I quickly realized that that part of the story couldn't be true. I mean, that there could not be ruin performing the Christmas Carol in '74, because ain't nothing going on there. So talked to Dennis Potter, who again was there that night. He said no, it happened in the late '80s. Which was odd to me, because he couldn't place. He can exit late '80s or early '90s, so he couldn't place a decade, which is weird to me, because I think if I had seen a ghostly ruined performance, I think I would have some idea of.
Well, especially because it sounds so dramatic.
Yeah. So that seemed weird to me, but anyway, so it's sort of a long story, and I'm sure I'll write up at some point, and people can read more details on it online. But basically, at that point, I had an eyewitness, and I had the whole story, and so I began trying to figure out, who else saw this? I mean, we have one person who saw it. He gave me his first-person story of seeing ghostly activity. But the odd thing was that I couldn't find anyone else. I tracked down the play's director. I tracked down the guy that played Bob Cratchit. I tracked other people, and I said, what can you tell me about this ruined performance of Christmas Carol? And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. It went fine.
Oh, really?
It was a great performance. People loved it, and the reviews were good. I was like, well, hold on here. The story is that there was they didn't leave the donuts, and the boy's ghost, ruined all these things. I talked to Dennis, and Dennis says that, everything went to hell. And I'm like, no, I don't know what he's talking about. So at this point, that was another turning point in the case, because I had several eyewitnesses, all of whom contradicted not just the story, all of whom contradicted my first-person eyewitness account. I mean, this is not just, that didn't happen. It's like, no, So at that point, it became more of a historical thing. And so, anyway, in a nutshell, and there was other stuff involved too as well, including amateur ghost hunters who went in and they went in with EVPs and ghosts and photos, and they had found all this evidence for the ghost there. Again, not bothering to do any research, not bothering to
check that they were a decade out and it never happened.
Yeah. I mean, that was because that's what happens. The ghost hunters, they're so excited about walking around the theater in the dark with their cameras. To them, that's the cool part.
Yeah.
Like, well, let's go find ghosts. And it completely escapes them that that's not where you start.
Yeah.
You don't start with that. You start with the research. You start with the historical stuff. So anyway, that was that basically was the end of the case, where I sort of pieced it all together, and there was just nothing there. I mean, there was no.
So what? It never happened? Was that your conclusion?
Oh yeah. Well, it never happened. I mean, there was apparently a tradition of leaving donuts out, but it wasn't necessarily for anything connected to the ghost. At least not originally. It was just, and I asked him about that. I said, well, where did the donuts come from? He said, well, sometimes the cast and crew would leave donuts out if they didn't finish them, and so it was just as a joke. It's just like, we'll leave donuts out because theater lore, ghosts, whatever else.
Oh yeah, because they're quite superstitious in the theater as well. Yeah.
They are very superstitious, but it wasn't connected to Bobby. It wasn't connected to the young boy until later on. So people went back and said, what must the ghost be? Well, hell, we had a 6-year-old boy killed in 1951. It must be his ghost.
Yeah.
And again, the amateur ghost hunters and amateur investigators in scare quotes. And that's another case where I was shocked that nobody had bothered to do this. This is not rocket science. If a person is telling you this happened, check it out. Who else saw it? I mean, but there's so little actual investigation. 99% of the stuff that's out there on any given subject, any given paranormal subject, is just rehashes of someone said something, and there's very, very, very little investigation. I mean, there's Richard does good stuff, and Joe and myself and Massimo and others, but there's a handful among for every one of us there's 2,000 others that are just they're content with just making stuff up or cutting and pasting, and there you go.
So how do you, if we go back to the psychology again, why did this guy think that there was all this stuff happening in the theatre if it never happened?
Well, that was a little harder to tease out, because you have to understand that he insists it happens. I mean, I never got him to admit that he was wrong. He's like, no, I know it happened. I mean, and when I pressed him and said, well, I mean, with all due respect, Dennis, no one else remembers this.
Yeah.
How do you explain the fact that I've talked to 3 or 4 other people who were there that night, and if Dennis can find someone else who else was there that night who remembers it his way, I'd love to hear from them. But I can't spend 5 years tracking down every single person. My assumption is that if 3 other people who were there that night say it didn't happen, it probably didn't happen.
So do you know if he started this whole story then? Do you know where it came from?
I think there's a couple different aspects to it. Part of it is that there's definitely a tourism aspect to it, because
I see.
Yeah, every Halloween, one of the local newspapers or radio shows or TV stations does a piece on the chemo theater ghost.
I see. Okay.
For every Halloween, as far as I can remember, hey everybody, don't forget Halloween, there's a chemo theater ghost here, and just about every Halloween, Dennis is on TV telling his story. I don't mean to be cynical. I mean, I don't, I believe he believes it. I think he's completely sincere. I don't think he's not making money off it. I think that my guess is that he just simply misremembered. My guess is that over the course of years, different things might happen here. They're just naturally weird things, and he sort of lumped them together and put them within the context of this particular play.
You're such a party pooper, Ben Radford.
I've been called worse.
I imagine you have. What have you been called? I mean, you must have people get in touch with you and say, how dare you, this did really happen. And
on occasion, I try to, what I try to do is bring bring some science to it, bring some psychology to it, and say, look, I'm not trying to disprove you. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm just saying this is what the evidence shows. In some cases, in the case of Bobby Darnall, for example, you do get people who are grateful, people who recognize the value in clearing up the story. In the case of Bobby Darnall, Bobby Darnall's family are still alive. They're now living in Florida.
Right.
And I actually was unable to contact them, but I sent them a letter saying, by the way, I'm researching this, and I don't think that they wanted to hear from me because they thought I was trying to exploit their dead brother's story. Okay. And I wrote down, I said, no, I'm clearing this up, because think of it this way. If you had a brother who had died in a boiler explosion in 1952, you're elderly, whoever else, your brother, sister still there, how would you feel if everybody, on all the internet and these books and magazines said that your dead brother was haunting a theater?
And every year some guy gets rolled out onto television and goes, come to my theater. Yeah. Right. And it's pretty insulting.
Yeah. So there's that element of it. But again, I just do the best I can. I try to give people my interpretation of it, and I say, look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but this is what I think happens. So.
And I've got to ask you this question as a final question, Ben. Have you ever seen any of these ghosty things? I mean, have you seen a chupacabra? Have you seen a Loch Ness monster?
I have not. Bigfoot? I wish that I had. I haven't. I would love to find them. I'm in the position where, even though I'm skeptical, I would love to have one and have a Bigfoot drop dead on my door or live, whatever, either. But I haven't, and I'm certainly open to the possibility. But until one shows up, I'm skeptical.
So, Chupacabra, when's that book going to be coming out?
The book will be published by the University of New Mexico Press, I think in February or March. My new book, Scientific Paranormal Investigation: How to Solve Unexplained Mysteries, is freshly out, like over the last couple weeks. It's out and about. I think there's some stores in Australia that are carrying it. It's available at radfordbooks.com and around.
And what about have you got a website that our listeners can go to find this information?
Most of my stuff is at radfordbooks.com, radfordbooks.com. I do have it. I have the domain. I haven't yet set it up, but eventually, I think it's chupacabramystery.net. Or or .com. It's the Chupacabra Mystery. I'm sure it'll redirect there, but and I'm on Facebook and I'm around. So.
All right. Well, Ben Radford, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us today on the Skeptic Zone.
Thanks for having me on.
You're listening to The Skeptic Zone. I'm Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com.
Now it's time for Dr. Rachie Reports with Dr. Rachael Dunlop.
Hello listeners, and welcome to Dr. Rachie Reports. Well, after a 12-month investigation, the Healthcare Complaints Commission have finally handed down their findings into the Australian Vaccination Network, or the AVN. The Commission concluded that the AVN provide misleading information about vaccination and must post disclaimers on their website clearly stating that they are anti-vaccination. The report found evidence that the AVN misleads readers by using reliable and peer-reviewed literature but selectively quotes from it, often in contradiction to the conclusions or the findings of the studies. And they also found that the AVN gives non-peer-reviewed and anecdotal material the same authority as peer-reviewed literature. Now, for a bit of background to listeners who don't know, there were 2 complaints submitted to the HCCC, one from the parents of Dana McCaffrey and one from Ken McLeod. Now, the McCaffrey's complaint was primarily concerned with harassment they had received and continue to receive from the AVN following the death of their 4-week-old daughter from pertussis. And Mr. McLeod's complaint against the AVN was primarily concerned with spreading false information about vaccines as their capacity as health educators. Now, this case set a precedent for the HCCC as they had not investigated this type of thing previously and were even uncertain if the AVN fell under their jurisdiction. However, after careful analyses, they were able to establish that indeed the AVN did fall under their jurisdiction, and so the investigation proceeded. Now, as you can understand, Meryl Dorey is not happy about these findings, and in particular, she is still claiming that the AVN does not fall under the jurisdiction of the HCCC. Here's Meryl Dorey speaking on Lateline.
This was not an independent investigation. This was an investigation by an organization that set out to support government policy, which is pro-vaccination. We do not agree that the HCCC has any jurisdiction over us, and we have been telling this from the very beginning, and we are seeking legal advice on this issue.
The Commission focused chiefly on issues raised by Ken MacLeod in its investigation and used the AVN website as a source. In the report, they focus on a post called 10 Reasons Why Parents Question Vaccination, which consists of such statements as vaccines have never been tested, vaccines contain toxic additives and heavy metals, and vaccines do not necessarily protect against infectious diseases. They asked Mrs. Dorey to provide evidence for all these claims. The Commission concluded in their final report that of the references provided by Mrs. Dorey in support of these claims, many were not relevant, she was guilty of cherry-picking or omitting data to support her claims, and other information she provided was demonstrably false. The report states, the AVN has selectively quoted information to suggest vaccination against meningococcal disease has been ineffective when there is no evidence of this, and the AVN claims that vaccination is linked with a range of long-term side effects, however, has provided no evidence to support this. So the Commission has recommended that the AVN include an appropriate disclaimer in a prominent position on its website, which should state, the AVN's purpose is to provide information against vaccination in order to balance what it believes is a substantial amount of pro-vaccination information available elsewhere. Point 2, the information provided should not be read as medical advice. And 3, the decision about whether or not to vaccinate should be made in consultation with a healthcare provider. And if the AVN refuses to comply with this recommendation, the HCCC will issue a public statement. So when I first read of the findings of the HCCC, I was initially disappointed. Some might say a directive to issue a disclaimer simply constitutes a slap on the wrist. Well, maybe it does. But since this story has spread across the webosphere, an unexpected result has emerged, and one that makes me very pleased indeed. Everywhere across the subsequent media coverage, the AVN is now being referred to as an anti-vaccination network. Now, regular listeners will shrug and say, sure, we already knew they were anti-vaccine, but what you may not know is that many people, especially vulnerable, non-science educated parents and the media, did not know this. So like the majority of anti-vaccine groups, the AVN have gone to great lengths to conceal their true beliefs from the public and especially from the media. So their rhetoric generally consists of we are pro-choice, we provide a balance, we are pro-information. Here's what Meryl Dorey had to say about this a few days ago.
Why is your organisation, Meryl Dorey, against vaccination? In a snapshot, just give us the thumbnail, if you would.
Well, Murray, I hate to correct you, but I'm going to have to...
Go on.
We're not against vaccination. We simply provide the balance of information. When most people go to their doctor or their council clinic, they're only told one side of the story, and vaccination is a medical procedure, and they need to get both sides.
So are you pro-vaccination?
We're pro-choice. We're pro-information and pro-choice. We never tell anyone that they should or should not vaccinate. We simply say that they should make an informed choice.
More pro-choice comments from Meryl as she talks about her Australian Skeptics Bent Spoon Award in 2009.
Which vaccines do you think are good then in Australia?
I think that all vaccines are up to the parents. And
that wasn't what I asked, though, was it, Meryl? Which vaccines are good? This was the point I think the skeptics were making, that you've never actually said which vaccine is worthwhile, which scientific design vaccine is good, worthwhile, or otherwise.
It is not my role, nor is it the role of the Australian Vaccination Network to tell anyone what they should or should not do when it comes to vaccination.
Interesting, because this contrasts quite sharply with comments made by Meryl back in January 2010, writing to her Yahoo group after the Haiti earthquake disaster. She wrote on message number 44295, I would like to donate to the efforts to help in Haiti, but I don't want any of my money going towards vaccines, so that Red Cross and UNICEF are out. Does anyone know of an organisation doing work on the ground there helping without vaccines? Some kind of pro-choice message, Merrill. And then there's this one. There will come a time, and I pray to God it will happen in my lifetime, when those who have pushed vaccines upon innocent, helpless babies, doctors, pharmaceutical companies, government officials, will be proven to have lied and cheated these instruments of death into our children's bloodstream. So instruments of death doesn't really sound like a pro-choice, pro-information message to me. And neither does the T-shirts that the AVN sell on their website, showing the slogan, love them, protect them, never inject them. But Merrill knows that publicly showing a face of anti-vaccination would not make you popular with the media or with parents. She even said so in July 2009 when she wrote to her Yahoo group, "While we are already seen as rabid, idiotic fringe dwellers by so many in the mainstream, it does our argument no good at all to bring in conspiracy theories which, though we may subscribe to them, are unprovable." So it is incredibly refreshing to see the credulity gone from the media with respect to the AVN. Only a few months ago, the AVN were unquestionably called upon to offer the other side of the story whenever there was a news story about vaccination. So Merrill is starting to lose her public face of pro-choice and pro-information. A quick perusal of the internet finds headlines about this story that all use the term anti-vaccination. Here's a few I've come across in the last 24 hours. Anti-vaccine group wrapped for false information. Anti-vaccine group accused of harassing parents. Top doctor backs disclaimer for anti-vaccination site. Warning order for anti-vaccine website. And even our light and fluffy morning television presenter Kerry-Ann Kennelly appears to have turned on Merrill. In an e-newsletter to her Yahoo group, Merrill described how, "Turns out none of the questions they read to me last night was actually asked, and Kerry-Ann asked me twice why we were anti-vaccine!" ! Here's Merrill getting a grilling on Radio 2UE in Sydney.
Are you medically qualified, Merrill?
I am not medically qualified, but I have been researching this issue for well over 20 years. And
so you're happy to put your lack of medical qualifications and 20 years of research up against the body of medical opinion that says vaccination's a hell of a good idea?
For someone that says you like freedom of speech and choice, you're very proactive against vaccinating.
No, I'm not.
Well, you are. Your argument is stating that.
I don't know how you get that. I am very much in favour of people being able to make informed choice.
If it is a medical procedure, what on earth gives you any sort of qualification to make any informed comment on this at all?
Well, 20 years of research.
Yeah, well, big deal. 20 years of research. I mean, give me a break.
Doctors.
Please.
Can I just ask you about the qualifications of the group, the AVN, and what they stand for? You would know, you'd know the name of a guy called Andrew Wakefield.
I do know Andrew Wakefield.
Do you guys still support him?
We support any research.
No. Do you still support him?
Do I support him? I don't give him any money, if that's what you're...
No, but verbally, you support him.
His ID?
Because he was struck off the United Kingdom Medical Register.
He was struck off the medical register.
And he's only allowed now to practice in the United States of America.
No, he doesn't practice. He's never been a practicing doctor. He's an academic, and he's still an academic. And, we know of many cases where people have been struck off because they simply didn't agree with what the medical community...
No, he failed in his duties as a responsible consultant. He acted against the interests of his patients.
No, I'm sorry. That's not what was found.
Oh, no. I'm quoting from the United Kingdom Medical Register and the reason why he was struck off.
Okay, what has this got to do with the HCCC, if I can ask?
Well, I'll tell you what it's got to do with is the fact that the AVN, you supported him in the sense that you disagreed with what the United Kingdom Medical Register did.
And I'm not the only person. There is an organization in the United States called the American Association...
But it goes back to what Murray was just saying. What qualifications do you have to disagree with the Healthcare Complaints Commission here in Australia and the United Kingdom Medical Registry? All of a sudden, what you're saying is far superior than what these two credible worldwide organisations are.
Sorry, Murray, but you're putting words in my mouth.
No, I'm not. I'm just stating a fact. Yeah, but do you realise something like smallpox doesn't officially exist anymore except in a scientific lab because vaccine has wiped it out across the world?
I'm sorry. Smallpox was not wiped out by vaccination because in the last 30 years of smallpox, the worldwide vaccination rate against smallpox was below 10%.
Okay, I'll inform the highly qualified doctor that gave me that information.
And I'll leave the final word with the guys from 2UE as Merrill's media darling, House of Cards, comes crashing down. And until next time, this has been Dr. Rachie Reports.
You can get it to us here on the radio station.
Also yesterday too, we spoke to Merrill Dorey, the Australian Vaccine Network. In my view, it should be the Australian Anti-Vaccine Network, but be that as it may, boy oh boy, did we have some email traffic on that. Far too many who are bashing us up to share them all with you, and thank you for those emails, bashing the tripe out of us. And we got just as many, we got to say, as supporting us in opposing what Merrill Dorey had to say.
Yeah, and apparently David Pryor was saying to us there's a blog on the 2UE website you can get on there and have a look at it. But I wish I'd seen this earlier. One of our listeners sent us through, she said, Merrill was saying, we want to give people choice, and I've never advised people not to get vaccinated.
Yep.
Quite interesting enough. And he sent this to me. It's a photograph of a T-shirt you can buy on their website.
Right.
And it says on the front of the T-shirt, love them, protect them, never inject them.
Right. That might be.
So what would that tell you?
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway. I mean, you've got to have something wrong with you upstairs if you don't go and get your children vaccinated. I know that there have been dreadful things happen to some kids.
But guess what? More dreadful things can happen if you don't.
Correct.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone, and a big thank you to all those people who came up to all of us at TAM in Las Vegas to say hello. It was so nice to meet each and every one of you. Photographs taken, bit of a chat. What a fabulous time it was. And a big thank you to Chris, who drove all the way from Texas and then helped us get down to the Strip one night. Chris, if you're listening, we were meant to leave you a little token of our appreciation, and all the confusion of the last day, we missed that. Chris from Texas, contact the Skeptic Zone and we can take it from there. Also, if you want to support the Skeptic Zone, of course, you can donate or subscribe. But also, I've put up for bid the complete Cosmos DVD series by Carl Sagan. It's Region 4, which is Australia, but I think anyone can really play it anywhere if you have the right DVD player. It's signed by Pamela Gay, Dr. Pamela Gay, the wonderful astronomer from Astronomy Cast. Phil Plait, the bad astronomer, Dr. Phil Plait, has also signed it, and, of course, James Randi himself, signed by James Randi, who was a good friend of the late Carl Sagan. You can check that out. I'll put a link up on the Skeptic Zone website, or you can just run an eBay search for Cosmos DVD. Well, that's enough from me. I think I need another cup of coffee now. And until next week, where we have some more fantastic interviews from TAM Las Vegas, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to The Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.
The Skeptic Zone.